I've got a few requests for people that ask if I could do a video on lessons learned building my house in the Philippines. So I put together a short list. Really, if you're thinking about doing this, the best thing to do is there's also a Facebook group called Expats Building Homes / Farms in the Philippines. And there's a lot of guys there that have built actually several houses. There's a couple that are actually U.S. people that build houses in Luzon area, and there are a lot of other people from all different countries that have all tried all different kinds of techniques. We won't get into what's the best house to build and what material and all that kind of stuff, because that really gets into a long subject, and people have tried all kinds of things. So all I can tell you is just my experience. If you want to know how I built my house, I've got a bunch of videos on my channel that go through the entire process of how I built it and what it's made of and things like that, and what some of the costs were. And all in all, I spent about $5.5 million on the house. So it's 170 square meter living area plus a separate area for the dirty kitchen and a patio. So that was my cost, two-story. You can be all over the map as far as how much it costs and where you live, and depending on what labor is. But here's a list. I don't know how long this video will take. I'll just go through the list. I don't have a lot of items. There's lots of things. I got 14 items. The first thing I learned when buying it, of course, is what everybody talks about, the clean title and no tax declaration. I've bought other property besides this since, and don't buy property that has more than one owner and they haven't settled yet. It's got to be surveyed, divided up, and ready to be sold, and the person whose name is on a title needs to really be alive. You think that's funny, but there are people that have inherited it over years, and no, they never went back and got a title, and there's 6 owners to it, and the agent will tell you, look, we'll clean this up really fast. No, they won't. So make sure the title's clean, make sure the owner is available and you can talk to him. Not just, yeah, we know the owner and he's around somewhere. It has to be somebody you can communicate with. The other thing is, different than in the U.S., I don't know how it is in other countries, a lot of times they expect the buyer to pay the capital gains tax. And by the way, capital gains tax in the Philippines is the total selling price of the property, not the profit that was made. It's based on the total sell price. That's because a lot of people undervalue their homes when they report them. So what they do is they just say, okay, well, how much did it sell for? And yeah, there'll be some people that'll say they want to put less than they sold it for and all this, but be careful when you're in the Philippines. Don't break the law on purpose just because it's tradition for somebody. It's just how it's always done. Be careful. The other thing I learned is you have to get a building permit. Make sure you have the permit and you have the number posted out front. I had a situation where I was assured all the paperwork was done. I got a big pile of paperwork, said here it is, it's all completed. We've got a building permit, and then an inspector came around one day. I wasn't there. They didn't have the permit number. Turns out the final paperwork wasn't filed because it was only like 3,000 pesos to do the final paperwork, which we ran to the courthouse and did right away and got our number. But he said he was going to shut us down in 2 days if we didn't have the number. So make sure that's all squared away before you start building. A lot of people will say, well, you can go ahead and start building and paperwork's on its way. Well, if the guy comes out and checks, and depends on where you live, they'll shut you down and fine you. And the fine can be quite hefty. It can be up to 50,000 pesos depending on where you live and what the rules are. The other thing I'd advise is when you get an architect and a designer to design the structure of the house, at least the layout and the 6 floor plans you're supposed to have and all the paperwork, electrical and plumbing and all that stuff, go to the local courthouse area, the government building, and there's an engineering department, and ask the people there who does this kind of work in the engineering department, because it'll be a person working there that gets everything approved, and he knows the paperwork, he knows the process, and he gets it all done for you. If you get someone else that's not associated with them, he has to go through them. It can take months and months. So in my case, it still took a long time to get the final title, but the blueprints and everything when approval was pretty quick. Although it is a fee, and it'll cost you, and it could cost you up to 30,000 or something like that. And we're not talking 3,000 or 4,000 pesos. It can be quite a bit to get that paperwork done. The other thing to know is, even though you've got 6 sets of blueprints, and you've got electrical prints, you've got the site drawing, you've got plumbing prints, you got all this stuff. when you get your actual build crew, and even the contractor yourself, if you decide to go with a contractor, they don't read these prints. They don't follow the prints when they're on site. So you need to really make sure they're following the prints and go through it with them. And that's why I always say, be on site. I started my process by being in Manila, and I bought a property in Cebu, and the initial structure, just basically the backfill of the lot, the building of the 2 floors with the pillars, and the basic structure of the house was built without me being there. And even though I had project plans and daily and weekly pictures and all this stuff, things still didn't go exactly as planned. So when you're building especially, you got to be on site every day. If you're not there every day, at least 3 times a week. But I'm telling you, the days you aren't there is when things will go wrong and people make decisions, and decisions they make, you won't be able to figure out what the logic was behind it. So you really have to be there. We had family members there to begin with the site preparation, and I'm telling you, there's a communications gap between what you want and what the print says and where the lot is. I mean, I finally actually had to fly down to Cebu and meet the engineer and show them where I wanted the house on the lot, because there was so much confusion. Because the tradition here is, by the way, the house is usually way in the front of the lot, right by the road. And I wanted more of a Western style where my house is in the middle, and I have a front yard with a carport, and then I have a backyard where I can have a garden and things like that, which was, it's not usual for here, and so they were really thrown off when I did that. The other thing is, yeah, you can hire a contractor to do the whole deal, but what I found out is I did the fixed price for the structure, which is to backfill the lot and to build the main slabs and the main columns, and the guy did a really good job, and he really was a structural engineer, but he was not a construction engineer, he was a structural engineer, and that was done well. But to go on the rest of the way, I would say hire a foreman that you can communicate with. Someone's done this, someone has a reputation in the area, and you're going to have to pay him more, and he's going to be your main person you're going to work with, aside from your wife. If you're married like I am, my wife was a crucial part in the building of this house and explaining things along the way, and the daily inspections and all that stuff, because that's the way to do it. But if you hire your own crew to do a lot of the work, your foreman, and you pay them daily directly, you will right off the top save yourself at least 30% on the build of your house, and you're going to avoid a lot of problems that normally would have popped up. Because here in the Philippines, if they make a mistake during the build, you know, they don't eat that cost. That's something you wind up paying for. You pay to fix it, and you pay to do it over, and it's all your cost, so it's all overrun on your end. So if they make a mistake, it's on you. You can try and make them pay for it, but it doesn't work that way here. Same with sourcing materials. Your best thing to do is you buy your materials yourselves. Now, I know a guy, and you'll see him on that Facebook page I told you about. He sourced almost all his stuff directly from Alibaba and had it shipped on cargo. He saved himself a ton of money. For fixtures and things like that, for myself even, I found out buying all this stuff mail order and ordering this stuff well in advance, you know, the wall plugs, the lights, the mirrors, all those kinds of things, saved 50% at least. Sometimes I paid 30% of the selling price that you saw in some of the stores and places around for actually getting it shipped to me with shipping costs. So save a lot of money if you buy this stuff yourself. You have to order in advance though. And if you do things like I did, like PVC ceilings and stuff where you decide to buy local, make sure you buy enough. Same with tile, that you have overage, because they won't have the same color. Every place around won't have matching PVC. So when you run out of that particular color, it's gone. You can't find any. So you're going to have to buy a little extra. Same with pipes and things like that. If you want the Atlanta and you want the better type pipes, the ones that are UV proof and things like that, you need to make sure you can get them and order them in advance. Which brings us to our next site, which was with me and my lights and everything else. All your materials got to be locked up somewhere. You really need a person on site that lives here. I had a guy living on site with his family, actually. He watched the property 24/7. I have everything locked up, the materials. I had things walk off from sure people working on the site. Sometimes up to 17 people here. and all up to a dozen LED lights came up missing, firefly lights. So they walked off somehow. I'm not saying who did it, but I just know that they did. So you really need to make sure there's a lockup, and the same with your tools. End of every day, you gotta have a tool crib, you got a lockup area. They all get accounted for, they all get pulled in, they don't get left out in the rain, and they get locked up. And next day they come back out again, because I'm telling you, they will either be left out in the rain, they'll be left somewhere, they'll disappear, and they'll just be gone. Which takes me to another subject, which is a lot of expats, especially Westerners, they want to make sure their guys use the best tools. Because here, when you hire someone to work on your house, they don't necessarily bring any tools with them at all. They rely on you to supply all the tooling. So you're going to do like a guy I know, he wanted to make sure things were exactly right. I myself bought levels and things like that, which they never used. He bought laser levels, which he's unsuccessfully tried to have them use several times, and they couldn't even figure out how to use them, and when they did, they used them wrong, and then they couldn't figure out why you'd want a level. So they can make things level. They have their own ways of doing it with water in the tube, and it's a 1,000-year-old process, and I know it's crazy for somebody in the West, but it works. So a lot of times, all they need is a good impact drill, they need a good angle grinder, they need things like that, trowels, shovels, heavy equipment stuff. Even mixing concrete, you'll find out they like to mix concrete on the ground, and that's something you'll be aware of. They mix it where they use it. So if you're going to do landscaping and stuff, you're going to have a couple of spots with 10 feet in diameter of solid concrete that was left on the ground because that's where they mixed it, and it's impossible to get rid of. Make sure they mix the concrete in a place that you are okay with, because later on you're going to have to clean that up. And there's a lot of work. And they don't use mixers. Usually you can try and rent a mixer, but they don't use them. If they use wheelbarrows, they don't mix concrete in wheelbarrows. Most of them here, the guys I had, weren't even aware that a wheelbarrow was originally designed to mix concrete in. That's just how it is. Now, as far as how I did the house, I did it in phases, but there are certain projects that I decided to go on competitive bid. Meaning I didn't just hire a worker to do the work. I went out for a fixed price, like on the wall on the outside. I went out for 3 bids. I went out for the price to see how it was done. I went with a guy that actually did some good work. He referenced me, he showed me some houses that he did already, so I checked on his work. I liked it, and that's the guy we set in. And you have to set in on your schedule. You need to make a written agreement. It's got to have dates on it. It's got to have performance. It's got to have milestones. And then you pay by the milestone. When they hit an area of achievement, when they've got so much done, they've agreed they're going to get done, then you pay out for that piece. Because otherwise what's going to happen is they're going to keep falling behind, but they're going to want their payment dates are going to come up, and they're going to want payment each time without actually hitting the mark. And I did the same thing, competitive bid for plumbing, and I did the same thing, competitive bid for electrical. Things I did hourly for were like installing the tile. I hired the guys directly. The wall finishing, the skim coating, the painting. Now the outside painting I did on competitive bid as well. So you can do it your own way. You'll save yourself a lot of money doing it that way. Competitive bid helps because, I don't know if you know it or not, but when you hire people here, you could hire 7 people and only have 3 show up at any one day. Doesn't necessarily mean they'll want to work the entire week, and they normally, it depends on what hours they work, but you'll usually get about 6 hours a day out of them. And some of them require you to have lunch, other ones did not. I was one of the few, I guess, or different expats that did not supply lunches for them. They had all their own lunches. I paid them a little extra money on the daily rate, and I didn't bother with that stuff. But don't be surprised if you show up at lunchtime and everybody's sleeping somewhere, and they take an hour, hour and a half off. That's normal here. So the other thing is people take off time for their birthdays, for fiesta, for hangovers, all those kinds of things. If somebody wants an advance on their salary, you give them an advance because I paid them at the end of the week. So if they've worked up until Wednesday, I'll pay them up until Wednesday. I'll pay them for the time they've already worked, and that's considered an advance. I know in the West, an advance means next week or time you haven't worked, but here an advance means before payday, but normally implies work I've already accomplished. So you don't pay for things that haven't happened. It's not a good idea. Like I said, make sure you have payment milestones. Everything you get done here, and you can't over communicate enough. I can tell you that when I built my place, even the structure, I said, okay, when are we going to do the outside walls? And he said, outside walls? I said, I'm doing a basic structure. And I said, well, yeah, but we're doing it with hollow block. And he said, yeah, but the normal basic structure is we do the main pads, the floor 1 and floor 2 with the main columns, and we do 1 meter of hollow blocks on each floor. Now, I'm not sure who's ever heard of having just 1 meter of hollow blocks on each floor. That's something we had to negotiate through then, because I'm like, no, a structure means complete walls, not not a 1 meter high wall on each floor, and then we consider it done. And make damn sure that your roofing is the extra thick metal that you buy, the 0.6, and also is hooked onto a steel structure, not a wood structure. A lot of places like that, especially if you hire a contractor, what he'll do is he'll try and keep the price down, and they'll build a wood structure for the roof, and they'll just nail it to the wood. And the first typhoon comes along, you're going to be missing a roof. You actually need a steel structure that is welded to the main rods inside your pillars. And you got to make sure they use heavy-duty rods, not the thin ones. For the main structure, it's all heavy-duty stuff. It's going to cost you more, and they're going to argue, hey, that's going to cost a lot. It is, but if you don't build the basic structure correctly, and you don't make sure there's no air gaps in the concrete and all these things, you're wasting your money. I already said you have to make sure that someone on site lives there and watches your stuff, because things will walk off. The power tools things are already covered, but don't go crazy buying a lot of power tools. Make sure you've got a tool crib. Make sure things don't walk off there as well. Now, one thing I don't think you thought would be possible, would be necessary, and it really is you have to coordinate things that are going on between the different groups. The guys doing the wiring and the plumbing and painting and all that stuff, because they'll want to go off on their own and do things, and there'll be a guy that wants to paint a room while somebody else is sanding, and a whole bunch of dust and everything comes up over the thing. Or they'll want to be doing the painting and they're just laying tile at the same time. And normally what I like to do is, when I made sure here, is that the walls were prepped and everything was painted before I put the tile floor in, because I'm telling you, all over the place you'll see that if you have tile in first, they'll drip paint and everything onto the tile, and it's hell to get off in some places. Same with stain and things like that. So make sure things are stained, everything's done before you do your stuff. So in my case, I had wooden stairs put in, top covers and mahogany top and all that. That had to be stained and in place before I had them paint the side of the stairs. They wanted to paint the stairs first and then stain the mahogany second, which is not going to work. So you have to coordinate the different groups. You make sure things are done. And I'm telling you, it's not a bad idea. You're going to be on site every day. Get with the foreman and have a quick recap in the morning, or at least the night before if you don't want to get up early enough for having him come in, but although some of them don't come in all that early. My guy did. What's going to be done for next day, what exactly they're going to do, how they're going to do it, what the approach is. Go back over it, because I'm telling you, there's a lot to be said about communication. My wife was key in communicating with them. My foreman I picked spoke English fairly well, but there's still a level of understanding that doesn't work, and you give up concepts that they aren't familiar with. Like in our bedroom, we had a barn door put in on the bathroom, and they absolutely didn't know what it was, even after I showed them. I mean, it was just something they just didn't use here. And then once they saw it, they really liked it, but they had no idea. They tried to put the doorway in the wrong place. I mean, for a barn door, you have to have enough room for the door to slide all the way to the left and still have wall behind it. You can't put the door opening in the middle. You got to put it towards the right, see? Things like that. Same with wall plugs, right? Where wall plugs went, I actually marked on the wall where I want the electrician to put all the plugs and all the switches, and which switch controlled what, and where the breaker box was, and all those things. And even with that, even with marking each one and going over it in a final review, there were 3 plugs that were missing, and one of them was a main air conditioner that had no power. They made the air conditioner vent hole was made for the split air con. Everything was set up, and there was absolutely no way for it to get power. And I said, "Hey, where's the plug?" And they went, "We didn't mark one." I said, "No, look, it's still marked here on the wall." And so you really have to make sure. And the same with drains, with the plumber. I mean, if you know where the sink is going to be, you need to get your sink. You need to put it in place. You need to agree on how they're going to hook up the plumbing. Otherwise, they'll put the plumbing way over. And the accepted practice here is wherever the drain winds up being, they just somehow put enough connectors into the pipe to make it line up. And that's not how you want it. You want to make sure that the sinks are all in place and you agree where all the drains are going to be, and all that stuff has to be done. And I had to get through a lot of work in order to make sure that when they did my outside structure, that they put the conduits in place so I could run my fiber for my internet. So I just had a fiber connector on the outside of the house where the wire went in and it came out on the inside. Otherwise, their normal process is they just bang through the wall and put a hole in the wall and then try and patch it up. And so make sure your conduits for electricity, make sure your conduits for internet, all those things are in place when they're making the walls so that they're out of sight and then they're properly set up. Also make sure you take pictures of everything before it's covered up, where all the wires are, because ultimately what's going to happen is something somewhere has to be changed, and they go, "Well, I have no idea where the wiring is underneath this and how it's hooked up." And you say, "Oh, well, I've got a picture. Let me show you exactly how this is wired," so that there's no question about it. The other thing is with plumbing, make sure that they put in the pipes for plumbing so that you've got a breather pipe so you don't have back pressure, so that the drains all work properly. You've got to have an outside. Same with my vents. I put vents in, and I want to make sure there's a hole in the wall and there's going to run a vent with a fan, and they really had no idea how to hook up a vent. They really wanted to just run a regular pipe through the wall and put an end cap on it. And I said, "No, there's actually a louver that goes on the end of that." I bought them at Ace Hardware, and I'd never seen one before. So they're like, "Okay." So there's a lot of things we went through that they'd never done before, and they said, "Okay, this is pretty good." And they have a lot of good ideas on their own as well. But you really have to be meticulous on where things are going to be. Same with circuit breakers. You want to make sure that you get a surge protector, which is what I got, in your circuit breaker box, and enough breakers for every device. You got to be specific. Otherwise, they'll just put a lot of things on one breaker, and I wanted a separate breaker for each air conditioner, a separate breaker for each shower heater, a separate breaker for each floor area for lighting. I have a lot of breakers, and they're not the screw-in type, they're the regular circuit breaker, because if you let them go with the cheapest thing, they want to put the old screw-in ones in there, because they like those. And one guy told me, "Well, these are good because if you blow this fuse and you don't have one, you can just put a coin in there and screw it in." Well, and that's also a good way to burn down your house, for one thing. But the other thing is just use circuit breakers, and you know what? When you order them, they aren't that expensive. Order a couple extras and keep them in your utility room where your breaker box is. And if one goes bad, you just pull it out and you put another one right in. They just snap in, snap out. So, but I can't emphasize enough though, be aware where your drains on the outside of the house are, where your ditches are going to be. They don't really know what a French drain is. You have to make sure you explain what kind of a drainage system you want. You got to do all that in advance, because here a lot of times it's done after the fact. Once it's been built and it begins to flood, then they say, "You know what, maybe what we need to do is we need to redig up this whole backyard and we need to put tiling in here, and maybe that's what we have to do." And I made sure when my lot was done, it was at the same level as the road. It was backfilled with some really big rocks. It had a steamroller come in and pressure it down, smash it down. I let the structure sit for a month and a half before we did anything else. We let things settle for over a couple of months when we did our initial lot prep. So just be aware, all that has to be done. And those are the lessons learned for me. I mean, you can save yourself a lot of money and a lot of time if you just do those couple of things. Like I said, join the expat group, expats building homes and farms in the Philippines, and there's guys with lots of other advice, and we can get into all kinds of discussions about materials and why we picked them. I guess the last thing I would say is also for water. There was a big controversy here about, oh, you need a water tank because you need water pressure. You don't need a water tank outside a tower. I did buy a 1,100 liter tank that's in the back, but I put a 3/4 horse engine on that motor, and it's pressurized, and I have a filter system. What I should have done is also purchased a water softener, which I did not, which I'll be adding on. The water's clean and everything's great, but I need a water softener. But make sure you pressurize your line here, and you've got a nice holding tank, at least 1,100 liters, so that if the local water supply does stop working, I use about sometimes 400 or 500 liters a day. So I've got probably 2 days worth of water in my tank if for some reason the water shuts off here. The only other thing that I was thinking about in the future, I did add IP cameras here for security, which wound up being good. I'm still thinking about solar, and solar, not the net zero, sell back to the grid, all this kind of stuff. Just some battery type solar stuff, because when we do have brownouts, which you don't have a lot, I actually only had about 3 or 4 since I've lived here, and I've been here almost a year now. And they haven't lasted all that long. It gets rid of the brownout type stuff, and it also will take your bill down. Although I'll have to say, because I bought super inverter split air cons, and I bought 4 of them, by the way, and I bought an electric washing machine, a full-size refrigerator, and I've got a lot of electronic things here. And my electric bill is less than in the little 2-bedroom townhouse that I rented that had an old-fashioned split air con. It wasn't a super inverter. They were charging me between 10 and 12,000 pesos a month for electricity, and I didn't even have the air con on 24/7. I had it on for maybe 7 or 8 hours a day. That was enough to cool the place down, mostly at night when we were sleeping. Here, I have the air conditioner on. I have a 1.5 horse downstairs on all day. I turn the one in the bedroom on all night, and I've got fans, and my electric bill at the very highest so far has been 10,000, and it's gone down to 7,000. So I actually pay less here with all my super inverter type stuff. So anything super inverter, buy that. I'm a big believer. The electric bill is down. If I get my solar in, which I'm still thinking about doing and buying from Alibaba, because by the way, remember I was talking about sourcing stuff? If you buy from Alibaba, and there's a guy on that other Facebook page I told you about that can help you with that, basically it's half the price of what you'd pay to have it installed and buy solar, from a local vendor. A local vendor will come and install. You want a 10,000 kilowatt system, which I'm a big believer now you need to overpower. It's going to be at 500,000 pesos at least. If you buy all this stuff from Alibaba, it's going to be about 220 to 230,000 pesos, and you're going to pay another electrician about 30,000 pesos to hook it up. So you decide which way you want to go, but that's what I've seen so far. Same with my filter system. I bought a high definition fiber filter from Korea. It goes to 0.01 micron. It filters everything out. I had a local plumber install it. He charged me 500 pesos. I ran it. It's filtering out all the rust and everything. It's working fine, actually. And if I would have gone to the local guy here, I think they were quoted me 20,000. I paid 5,000 for the filter, and like I say, 500 to have it installed, so 5,500 altogether. So you decide before you buy, check it out. And mail order takes a while, but a lot of times it's pretty good. And if anybody hasn't told you yet, you'll know a good way to order and mail order a lot of times is COD, if you can, because once in a great while you may just get that brick in the box instead of the item you ordered. And that's not a joke, that's real. All right, well, thanks for watching this video on lessons learned. We can have more discussions on it. We can have a live stream sometime if people are interested, but I don't know if there's more than 2 or 3 people that were interested in it. But we can talk about it. I've got probably several days worth of experiences of things that happened building the house, and with all the equipment, with all the materials, and with all the misunderstandings, and with the going all the way to Quezon City to get the title, and oh my God, it's quite an experience, I'll have to say. Okay, well, thanks for watching.